there, Devlin Blake here. What if I told you you could write 7,000 words an hour, even if you can't type at all? That sounds fantastic, right? But I'll let you in on a little secret. I can't type. I look down at the keyboard when I type, and this is something you should never ever do because you could really hurt your neck. I had to learn that the hard way. But I didn't want to give up my dream of writing, and once I discovered this secret, I realized I didn't have to. It turns out knowing how to type doesn't really matter in being able to write. You can't achieve 7,000 words by typing. Well, maybe you can if you're Barbara Blackburn, Guinness Book of World Record typing champion. She can type 7,500 words an hour. But she was using a Dvorak simplified keyboard, and I bet you use a QWERTY like most writers. After all, a QWERTY is your standard keyboard. I'm not even sure where you could find a Dvorak, although there probably is one available for sale online. But for the rest of us who aren't Barbara Blackburn, typing speed averages about 41 words per minute. That's about 2,500 words an hour. It's a respectable number, but not that great when you're trying to balance out your writing with your life. So what's the secret to writing 7,000 words an hour? The secret is actually talk-to-text software. You need to forget about typing entirely. The average person types 41 words per minute, but speaks at a rate of 120 words per minute. Good talk-to-text software keeps up with this, but your fingers can't. Now that you know the secret, owning the software is only part of it. Just like buying running shoes is only part of running a marathon. Now you're probably wondering how fast can you expect to go with talk-to-text software. And of course the numbers I'm about to give you are based on my own experiences, and your results may vary. But on a good day, I can write as many as 10,000 words in an hour. On a bad day, I can usually get out around 5,000 words in an hour. That's still double the speed I could type. If I could actually type. In case you're wondering who I am and what makes me qualified to teach this course, I'm an author who writes under a variety of pen names. I've published 24 books in various genres while maintaining a full-time job. Dark fiction is my newest genre. I've also decided to keep the name Devlin Blake for when I write about writing. Specifically, I love writing about ways to make your writing faster and better so you can publish all the books you ever dream about. I developed a variety of systems because I wanted to be able to get books out fast, but still have time for my life and my job. Now, before we start, there is something I'd like to mention. I'm not promising you can write your book in a day with this method, even though if you do the math, you might come to that conclusion. After all, 7,000 words an hour at 8 hours a day equals 56,000 words, and that's a whole book. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way, or at least not for me or anyone I've ever met. In order to write 7,000 words an hour, you have to have a plan and be able to function at a very high level. It's pretty much impossible to function at this level for 8 hours a day, which is why I always recommend spending only an hour or two on writing. If you have more time than that to devote to writing, be sure to take the appropriate breaks in between writing sprints. This will keep your brain functioning at the required high level. Now I'm going to go over some mindset things in this class, along with some light planning and the best way to get results. Soon you'll be writing more words than you ever dreamed possible, and you'll be able to finish your first draft fast. Are you ready to get started? When I talk about writing 7,000 words an hour, I'm talking about writing a first draft only, not a finished project. You want to write your first draft as quickly as possible. That way you can edit it and see what changes need to be made. That's the reason talk-to-text software works so well. In this section, we'll take a look at first drafts, what they are, what they should be, and why they're so important to your future book. You'll notice I use the words first draft and rough draft interchangeably here. While not every rough draft is a first draft, every first draft is a rough draft, and that's why I do it. It's been said that the rougher the first draft, the better the final one. I'm not sure who said this, but based on some of my own experience and on what I've heard from others writers, it certainly sounds correct. A rough draft will never be your masterpiece, and if it's your first draft, it's always your rough draft. Instead, the rough draft is the bones your masterpieces will hang from. I like to think of the rough draft as a sketch. I went to art school, so you'll probably hear a lot of art references in this class. When you're sketching, you include all kinds of details that don't matter. That's because you don't know which detail matters yet. Great artists paint masterpieces because they never censor their sketches. If they don't like something in the sketch, they pick up a different color and just draw a line over it. If you've ever seen an artist's sketch pad, you'll notice they have hundreds of sketches of the exact same subject from different angles and have different details. When an artist goes to paint their masterpiece, they go back to all their sketches and decide what to leave in and what to take out. Books are the same way. Without this preliminary work, an artist's masterpiece would seem amateurish. And your book will seem amateurish if you don't write a rough draft first and then figure out what to leave in and what to take out. Now, I mentioned before that artists change colors when they go to change a line in their drawing. They do this instead of erasing it. They know that at a later date they might decide they want that line back in, so they change the way it looks so they can see both the old version and the new version. One of the problems emerging authors have is that they try to edit and write at the same time. And that's one of the worst things you can do for your story. Science has proven that the part of the brain that creates and the part that edits are two completely different parts. They're not even located near each other. Nature did this on purpose because it knows you can't create and criticize at the same time. Yet many writers still try to do this. That's why when you write a first draft, you should keep writing for as long as you can without stopping for any reason. You especially shouldn't stop to make any corrections. Now is not the time to figure out the perfect phrasing, the detailed imagery, and the brilliant metaphors. You'll have time for that later in subsequent drafts. Now is the time to sketch out your story. Figure out your characters, your plots, your subplots, your big twists, your climax, and the ending, and all the scenes. It's not even necessary to get the scenes in the right order. There's time for that later. And if there's a scene screaming at you that needs to be written right now, but it doesn't come next in your story, write it anyway. Then write the title chapter as a brief description of the scene. This lets you find it later and figure out where it really belongs. If you think of two different ways to say something, take a cue from the artist and write it both ways, one right after the other. Who knows? Seeing them both together later might even give you the inspiration for a great third option. A rough draft is your time to play, to have fun, and to explore all the options for your story. When your rough draft is finished, you'll have something raw and pure. Only then can you refine it into something that makes sense. Setting your mindset up for this kind of freedom is the first step in being able to write 7,000 words per hour. I have a lot of new writers ask me, why bother writing fast if it's just junk? The reason is simple. It's not what you write or the words you put down on the page that are valuable. Even if your words are so awful they could win the Bueller-Lytton fiction contest for the worst line ever, you still need to write these words. Writers are like pianists, only with a keyboard instead of an actual piano. All beginning pianists want to dress up in that fancy black outfit, sit in front of the grand piano, and play beautiful music for a packed house. But before a pianist can do that, they have to practice scales. And writers are the same way. I know you want to publish your book and put it in front of millions of readers, but for right now you need to focus on just actually writing. Each word written trains your brain to write consistently, no matter what the conditions. Soon this becomes a habit, and once that happens, the words start flowing onto the page. After a point, inspiration will come when you call for it. This way, when you're ready to play for that packed house, or in your case, write your novel, you'll be able to do it with ease, fluidity, and enjoy the process. So how many words do you need to write in order to become a great writer? Well, of course, everyone's got an opinion on the exact amount, but most say it's at least 1,000,000 words. Now, before you gasp, let me explain that 1,000,000 words isn't really that many words. After all, it's not 1,000,000 sentences or 1,000,000 books. It's just 1,000,000 words. And consider this. If you write 5,000 words a day, you'll reach 1,000,000 words in only 200 days. That's less than a year. If you write 7,000 words a day, you'll reach 1,000,000 words in only 142 days. That's less than half a year. And if you write 10,000 words a day, you'll reach 1,000,000 words in only 100 days. Think about that a moment. 100 days, and you could be a great writer. Now, you have to admit, that's faster than most schools and easier than most classes. After all, you're not writing some boring assignment or practicing monotonous scales. You're writing what you want to write about. You're writing your story. You're just thinking about a better way to put it into words. And I'll let you in on another secret. You don't have to be a great writer to publish or to become a successful writer. Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey were not beautifully written books. I'm obviously not going to go into the merits of whether or not they were good books, because everyone has an opinion on that. But they were very popular books. But even the book's own fans agree that they are not greatly written books. Here's a line from Twilight to prove it, just in case you've never read the books. Now I know you can write as good as that, especially if you practice writing 5,000 to 7,000 words every day. Practicing writing makes great books. And if you're worried about the time it takes to produce a book, consider this. You don't have to be content just writing books. A book is 50,000 words or more. So that seems pretty daunting when you're just starting out. But there are other shorter story formats that might work for you. A novella is between 10,000 to 49,000 words. Usually it hovers around 30,000, but there are exceptions. Novellas traditionally do pretty well on Amazon. They're short works, and they work great in anthologies. Now, a short story is 10,000 words or less. And if you're looking to publish in magazines, this is where you should start. Most magazines prefer stories of 2,000 to 7,000 words. Now, some magazines are into flash fiction, which is 1,000 words or less. And if you're trying to build up a Twitter following, you could tell twabbles, which is a type of flash fiction found only on Twitter. Naturally, twabbles are 140 characters or less. Now, if you practice writing at least 5,000 words a day, then at the end of the year you could have a novel, some novellas, dozens of short stories, hundreds of flash fictions, and thousands of twabbles. You could be published in magazines, on Kindle, in print. Your possibilities are limitless. So isn't that worth a few scales, especially since you're doing what you love? So there are two types of writers, planners and pantsters. A planner is a person who outlines or plans their story in advance. A pantster is a person who makes everything up as they go along. This type of writing is known as writing by the seat of your pants, which is why they call it a pantster. I actually tried being a pantster once. That's how I wound up writing 5 first drafts of the exact same book. The first few versions were boring and uninteresting, which is why I kept on writing it. And even though I must have wrote 1,000,000 words for that book, at least 1,000,000 words for that book, they were boring and uninteresting. So that's why now I advocate planning, so you don't write 1,000,000 boring and uninteresting words like I did the first time. Plus, one of the big secrets to being able to write 7,000 words per hour is to know in advance where your story will be going. Let's face it, right now you probably have a few characters, a handful of scenes, and some big gaps between them. This is where planning comes in. Now, there are a lot of big-name writers out there who say you don't need to have a structure or even a plan. And I'm going to tell you something that very few people will tell you. They're lying to you. All the greatest books in the world were planned. Victor Hugo wrote out scenes for Les Miserables on tiny slips of paper. Then he shuffled the scenes around until the story finally worked. The same was true for Tolstoy's War and Peace, even though he used a different outlining method. Great books take great planning. Even master Renaissance painters like Raphael or Michelangelo sketched everything out in pencil before the brush ever touched the surface that they were going to paint. So why is it we believe we don't need to plan? Mostly because that's what we've been brainwashed into believing. We think that's not how a true artist works. We have some mistaken idea that a muse should guide our words. We get this idea from TV, movies, and of course other books. And I've already mentioned that some big-name writers subscribe to this nonsense. So why is it the big-name writers are lying to us? The thing is they aren't, or at least they don't honestly think they are. They claim they write a book without a plan and without a structure, but when you actually break down their writing process, you notice they have both in their stories. Here's where what I call the non-lie comes in. What these writers have actually accomplished is a way to internalize the entire process I'm explaining to you right now. Because it is internalized, there's never any outside trace of it. So they think they actually are writing the way they say they're writing, which is without a structure and without a plan. And because there's never an outside trace of it, they can go on telling their non-truths to the world, and people believe them because there's no physical trace of what they did. Think of it this way. Let's say there's a very heavy box that needs to be lifted, and you ask a weightlifter to move it. Now, a weightlifter is going to pick up the box easily and say it wasn't that heavy. And to him, it's really not that heavy because he probably lifts much more than that a lot more often. However, just because he was able to pick it up without effort doesn't mean it wasn't heavy, and it doesn't mean that you and I could do the same thing with the same box. We might not be able to lift that box at all. The same is true with writing. It's impossible to internalize the process when you're just starting out. Eventually you might get there, but that's a skill that takes many, many books. Just like lifting that heavy box takes a lot of weightlifting beforehand. And of course you have authors like James Patterson who are famous for their outlines. He continues to outline right to this day, right out on paper. I had an opportunity one time to see one of his outlines, and let me tell you, it was a work of art. Now, if you're reluctant to outline, you're probably thinking of those tedious ones you had to do in school. You know, with the little Roman numerals and the A, B, C. Weren't those awful? But we're talking about a creative outline. And a creative outline only needs to be a sentence or two to show you where everything goes. Personally, when I write a story, I use a 4-part structure. The outline there is a simplified version of what I use for all my stories. It works for any genre and for a story of any length. I refer to the 4-part structure as acts, the way you would in a play. Act 1 is the intro. This is where we get introduced to the character's world and the world's problem. Act 2 is where the character ignores the problem and hopes it will go away. Of course it doesn't go away. The problem gets much worse. A lot of writers call this part of the story the midpoint. Instead of solving the problem, something happens that changes everything the character believes to be true. Now we're up to Act 3. This is where the character tries to take charge of the problem. But it's actually a much bigger problem than they thought. Even bigger than it was in Act 2. Act 3 ends with the beginning of the climax. And now, of course, we have the ending. The ending, or Act 4, is where you have your final fight and some kind of resolution. At this point, your character either survives or doesn't. Or in some cases, they could suffer a spiritual death, which is the same as not surviving. Once you have your story loosely planned out, the words will just flow from your lips onto that page. And since you know what's going to happen, this enables you to say it in the best way possible, which allows you to become the creative writer you know you can be. Now it's time to talk about the software. Specifically, we're going to be talking about Dragon Dictate and Microsoft Talks to Text. Now, it's true there are other talk-to-text programs out there besides these two, but these two are the ones that integrate the most seamlessly with Microsoft Word, which is what most writers use to write. Now, before we go into the differences of each software, I want to discuss some generalities. This will help you get the most out of either software. We'll talk more about training specific softwares in the next section. So, of course, the big question is, how fast can you expect to go with talk-to-text software? And like most answers in life, the answer is, it depends. As I said earlier, on a good day I can write as many as 10,000 words per hour. On a bad day I can get out around 5,000 words per hour, which is still double the speed most people can type. You'll notice I'm going to talk about 3 different sets of statistics here when I talk about how fast you can write. I want to give you an accurate overview of the high, medium, and low word counts, but even the low is pretty good. After all, in order to type 5,000 words per hour, you'd need to achieve typing speeds of 84 words per minute, which we've already established that's about twice as fast as the average person types. Now, if you write 5,000 words an hour for 1 hour a day, you can have a 50,000 word book in only 10 days. Now, if you write 7,000 words an hour for only 1 hour a day, you can have a 50,000 word book in 7.5 days. And if you write 10,000 words an hour, you can have a 50,000 word book in 5 days. Let that sink in for a moment. 5 to 10 days, and you could have your first draft. Now that you truly see the potential, let's look at the 2 different softwares. Dragon Dictate is one of the oldest and most reliable talk-to-text softwares. It's the one I started with almost a decade ago. Back then it was new and it didn't work as well as it does now. It had a lot of trouble understanding accents. Today, however, it figured out a way around that by using scripts. Dragon actually comes with a lot of scripts. They're business letters, emails, parts of books, and even speeches by famous people. When you first get Dragon, you need to read some scripts. Don't go too fast, and try to read it the way you'll actually dictate to it later. The beauty is, since Dragon already knows what all these words say, it's listening to how you pronounce them. Once you finish reading the scripts, click the Finish button, and then the software updates itself. Now this part can actually take a long time, so unless you have an entire day to work on it, you usually can't use Dragon the same day you decide to read to it. Dragon's price is about $2.99 right now. You can probably find them cheaper on Amazon or on sale. If you buy the physical version instead of the downloaded version, you'll get a Dragon-approved wired headset. Now Dragon also has other accessories that work well with its software besides that headset. For example, Dragon has a Bluetooth microphone and a voice recorder. The voice recorder is one of their newest and coolest features. You dictate directly into the recorder, then when you get home, you hook it up to your computer and Dragon will transcribe your words for you without you having to repeat anything. Another cool thing about Dragon is it comes with advanced options for customization. If you use a lot of unusual words, such as you find in high fantasy, sci-fi, or medical, or jargon, then you have the ability to type these words into the computer and read these words into Dragon. In this way, you train the Dragon to recognize these words by matching it up with your sound. Later, when you dictate these words into Dragon, it types the right word. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the other talk-to-text software, which is Microsoft's talk-to-text software. Microsoft Talk-to-Text came out around the time of Windows 7. So if you have a Windows 7 computer or higher, then you probably already have it. I actually had mine for years before I realized I had it. Now, if you're wondering if your computer has it, go to Start, like you see here in the picture, go to Search Programs, and then type in the phrase Speech Recognition. This is what Microsoft calls it, and how Microsoft recognizes it. Then you should see a screen that looks like this. If you see it, congratulations, you have it. Now, one of the best things about Microsoft Talk-to-Text is that it's all ready to go right out of the box. Well, technically there is no box, but you get what I'm saying. The training you have to do for it is very minimal because it already comes partially trained. You could train it and start writing with it on the same day, which is one of the reasons it's my new favorite. Sorry about that, Dragon. However, the flip side to this is because you don't spend a lot of time training it now, you will have to practice a little more as you go along. This is sometimes what I prefer, as the accuracy is a little better. People don't normally read the same way they dictate. And what's really nice about Microsoft Talk-to-Text is that it lets you correct entire sentences at a time instead of only going word by word the way Dragon does. Microsoft also has a playback feature which lets you hear what you sound like to the software so you can train yourself to say certain words more clearly. The Microsoft version does have some customization options, but it's not quite as versatile as Dragon is. Dragon lets you type in a strange word you want to use. However, Microsoft makes you spell it out loud using phrases like A like apple and C like cat. After you spell it out loud, it asks you how to pronounce this word, and that's how it learns it. It's a much longer process, so if you have a lot of strange words in your story, this might not be the right software. So which one is actually best for you? The answer, of course, is that it depends on how you talk and how you plan to use it. If working with recording devices, a lot of strange words, or if you have a heavy accent, Dragon might work better for you. If you only plan on doing dictation on your computer and use more normal sounding names and have a more neutral accent, then Microsoft's speech recognition might work better for you. And if you have a newer model computer, you already own Microsoft's version free. And that's a big plus. Now let's talk a little about how to train the software. Though both softwares do have their individual quirks, all talk-to-text software runs off pretty much the same fundamentals. It's these fundamentals that we'll look at in this chapter. Have you ever heard a computer speak? They sound slightly off with no emotion or inflections in their tones. This is actually how a computer prefers you to speak to it. You need to speak in an even tone, not too loud or too soft. You also want to keep your voice at an even pace. Talking too fast with inflections just confuses it. When the computer gets confused, it either stops trying or starts typing nonsense words. By far, the hardest thing to remember about talk-to-text software is to remember to speak the punctuation. You actually need to say the words, comma, period, new line, question mark, new paragraph, and so on. While this feels awkward in the beginning, it becomes second nature with time. In fact, it could become such a second nature that when you start doing webinars, you find yourself speaking the punctuation. I actually had that problem when I recorded this. You should also avoid using the software when you're suffering from allergies or a cold. The software learns each time you use it. If you train it with a nasally stuffed up voice that isn't normal for you, then you'll have to untrain it later with your real voice. You really don't want to take the time to do that, and it leads to unreadable first drafts. Now let's talk about the best way to handle unusual names in your story. Talk-to-text software can recognize some names, but not all of them. This is especially true for people who have strange names. The method I'm about to reveal is a method that has personally worked for me, but not one I've seen talked about anywhere else. I call it the blank method. It starts by choosing a word not likely to show up in your story. I actually use the word blank, which is why I call it the blank method. After all, if you say blank to the talk-to-text software, it actually types out the word blank. So whenever a character's name would be mentioned, I used the word blank. For example, blank picked up the urn and turned it over slowly. Then, once the first draft is completely written, using blank as a substitute for the character's name, you go to Control F on your computer. This Control F is what finds all instances of a word in Microsoft Word. You tell it to find blank, and then you tell it to replace blank with the right name. Now, if you have more than one difficult name in your story, you'll want to use a different word that won't show up. Or you could just use common names like Jane or John. Every software recognizes easy names like Jane or John. Then you just replace these names with the real names later, the same way you did with blank. Though they say practice makes perfect, no talk-to-text software will ever be perfect. But typing isn't either, so I'd rather be imperfect faster. So now you've learned how to use the software, you have your book somewhat planned out, and now let's talk about how to achieve numbers like 7,000 words per hour. It all starts with what I call your isolator space. I named it after the weird invention you see here. This weird invention was invented in 1925 to usher in a new era of productivity and focus. It claimed to be able to keep you 100% focused on the task at hand without being interrupted by any outside distractions. Now let's face it, that thing looks ridiculous, not to mention somewhat dangerous. That really is an oxygen tank attached to it. But it did have one thing right. In order to be the most productive you can be, you have to have your own little cocoon of a world. You have to be able not just to ignore the distractions, but to completely be isolated from them. Ignoring the distractions won't work, because in ignoring a distraction is a decision you have to make. You have to be completely isolated from distractions in order to be productive. That's why I call it the isolator space. But fortunately, creating your own isolator space isn't that hard. First, you chase out all the living distractions from your writing space. The kids, the pets, the partners. No one should be in your isolator space. Shoo them away until you're done writing. Next, you have to get rid of all the tech-based distractions. Close the email, the Facebook, or put the phone in another room or turn it off entirely. TV and music should also be off. Not only is this noise distracting you, it also distracts the software. The software can't understand you through background noise. Even though it's tempting to listen to music through headphones while writing, it's not recommended. Not only does this distract you, it also alters the pitch of your voice. Most people unconsciously match their pitch to the song that they're hearing, even when they're not singing along. This pitch change confuses the software, which makes it write a bunch of nonsense. Now, if you're the type who thinks distraction doesn't hurt, consider this. You've probably heard of the zone. It's a place where you're the most productive as a writer, or most productive as anything. Writing's the most fun when you're in the zone. Once you're there, any distractions can rip you right out of the zone, and it takes a long time to get back into it. How long exactly? Well, researcher Gloria Mark of the University of California found that it takes an average of 25 minutes to return to the zone after an interruption. That goes for any interruption, even if it's just the 2-second interruption of your inbox dinging and you choosing to ignore it. That's a distraction, and it just tore you out of your zone. And 25 minutes is a very long time if you only set aside an hour for writing. Choosing to ignore something is still a decision that takes you out of the zone. That's why it's best to set up your own isolator space when you write. The last thing we're going to talk about in this section is flexing your writing muscle. Writing fast, even with software, is like a muscle. You have to flex it in order for it to work well. When you first start, it's impossible to write for an entire hour with this method. This is something you need to build up to. It starts with time boxing. This is where you set the timer and do nothing else until that timer dings. It's a really easy process. Here are the steps. First, you open a new Word document. It's important this Word document is clean so you can keep track of your word count. Microsoft Word does this easily. In most versions, it tells you your word count right there at the bottom. Now set your timer for 5 minutes. It's tempting to want to do that whole hour now, but that's something that needs to be worked up to. Now write for every second of those 5 minutes until that timer goes off. Then lean back and see how much you've written. Don't feel bad if the words aren't a lot of words right now, or if most of the words are wrong. Both the accuracy and the word count improve over time. A notebook is another good way to keep track of your own word count. You'll want to keep track of the date, the amount of time, and the words produced. Keep this up for at least a week. At the end of the week, take out your notebook and compare the results from the beginning of the week with the end of the week. This will show you how much faster you've gotten. In most cases, it'll be significantly faster, sometimes even double or triple your previous time. Now that you're good at writing fast, it's time to add another 5 minutes and repeat the process. Then just rinse and repeat until you can write for a solid hour this way. Congratulations, you've just taken one of the biggest steps to achieving your book.